Hi everyone, Sean here from S&P Designs, and today I'm going to be taking you through building my latest pattern update, the fitted gauntlet with the elbow pads. This pattern is now available in my Etsy shop, and you can get the link in the description below. So let's just jump right into it. Once you've got your pattern printed and cut out, you're going to want to cut the main gauntlet pieces out of headliner foam and then adhere them to the back of your fabric. Be sure you make the marks for the outer sides and the inner sides. That's going to make a difference when you go to put the zipper in. Once you've got those cut out, you're going to sew the outer sides, the ones with the one dot, together first. So you're just going to line up your edges. And stitch that down at your 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then what I always do is go in and trim the excess foam out of one side of the seam allowance, and only out of one side of it. Because what you're going to do now is you're going to fold that seam allowance under onto the side that you've just trimmed out. And what that does is it just takes some of the bulk out of the seam when you're top stitching. And then just run a nice little edge stitch all the way up. And then to finish taking that bulk out, just go in and carefully, on the back side, trim all that seam allowance out. Nice and close up to your stitching. I usually do it around 1/16 of an inch. And that's going to give you a nice clean curve and seam on the inside. Now you're going to do exactly the same thing. You're going to sew the center back. Trim that out. And do a nice top stitch. All right, now that you've got the main piece together with the outer edge and the center back sewn together, what you're going to do is go along the upper edge and you're going to bind that off. I like to use a thin stretch faux leather for my bindings because it's a nice texture, and it also can move around the curves because it's got a little bit of stretch to it. It also doesn't add a whole lot of bulk. So you're just going to line the edge of your binding strip up to the edge of the piece and just sew it at about 1/4 of an inch all the way around, just working that binding strip around the curves. And for this piece, you can cut it right up. You can cut it off right up to the edge. You don't need any overlap here. Then just fold it under. Get it nice and snug so you've got a good tight edge. And then right up against the edge, you're gonna do what is called a stitch in the ditch, where you're gonna sew right up against it. And just ease that binding material around all those curves. Again, using something that has a little bit of stretch is really helpful here because you can mold it very easily. And then once you finish binding, just go back in there and very carefully trim out the excess. Unlike a lot of bias strip binding, since this faux leather doesn't fray, you don't really need to fold it under. You can just roll it to the back, stitch it down, and then trim it off. Now, you've got your top edge of your main gauntlet piece finished with your binding. Now what you're going to do is you're going to do the elbow band. So same thing, you're going to take your headliner foam, adhere it to the back of your fabric, and then bind off the top edge. You'll take your elbow band and you'll see a placement line on the pattern, which is about 1 inch up. So what you're going to do is you're just going to lay the top edge of the gauntlet against that placement line with the elbow band underneath, and you're going to stitch straight through all the layers to secure that down. Next, you're going to put your zipper in. So starting at the top edge, work your way down with your separating zipper. Don't worry if the zipper's too long, you're going to be able to trim it off and shorten it later. Just make sure that you've got enough zipper to go in there. Once you've got the one side down, go in and put the other side in. And this is what it should look like on the inside at this point with both of them sewn down. Then unzip your separating zipper and give it a nice little top stitch just to make sure everything's nice and clean and laid down there. Now we're going to shorten this zipper and finish the wrist. So put a binding strip down across the wrist edge, and you're going to leave an overlap here of about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. You're going to be able to cut that zipper at this point, and then what you're going to do is you're going to roll that overlap back to the back and then turn the underside of the binding down and stitch down over it. And it's going to encase the bottom of that cut zipper. You could also put a stop on there if you're worried about it, but that should be fine to hold this zipper down. So there is your finished main gauntlet piece, finished wrist, finished top edge, zippers in. Now we're going to do the hand plate. So trace out your hand plate pattern onto your headliner foam. Then you're going to adhere that to the back of whatever fabric you're using. Here I'm using a perforated faux leather. And just give it a quick little test on your hand, because at this point you can trim it off if you need to, if it's too big or too small. And then I also like to just check it for size with the gauntlet at this point. Once you're happy with it, go ahead and bind the outer edges as shown here. And then you're going to put your elastic on. So starting from the under the thumb, sew the elastic down, then pull it across and stitch it down to the back of the hand. And this is what your elastic should look like that goes underneath the palm of your hand. Next, you're going to fit it to the gauntlet and attach it where it needs to go. I've shown it here with a black glove underneath so that I can figure out exactly how I want it to fit. Now we're going to work on the elbow. So for the elbow, what we're going to do is we're going to take 2mm craft foam and we're going to cut that without the seam allowance in it and adhere that down to the foam side of our headliner. Now what I'm going to do is take the headliner and I'm going to add the seam allowance back on the sides that are going to get sewn. The outer edges don't need any kind of seam allowance because they're going to get bound. So cut out all your pieces. I'm just kind of eyeing them here, but you can always take the pattern pieces and lay them down over once you've got the EVA foam down on the headliner and trace out your pattern pieces. Now we're going to take those pieces and adhere them to the back of the material, which is the perforated faux leather is what I'm using here. So I've got these spray mounted. I'm just pressing them down onto the back of the faux leather to hold them down. And that's what they look like from the outside. And now once again, I'm just going to cut all 3 of these pieces out, retaining that seam allowance and cutting it to the edge everywhere it's going to be bound. So now you can see I've got the EVA foam in there, but I've got a nice foam and fabric seam allowance, and then everywhere else the EVA is sandwiched in between. So once you got all your pieces cut out, I'm going to use a zipper foot to assemble this. So you can see the needle comes right to the edge of the foot, so I can get it right up against the edge of that EVA foam. I'm going to take the pieces, I'm going to line up the edges of the EVA foam. I'm going to put that edge of the EVA foam right up against the zipper foot. And then I'm just going to carefully, making sure that I use my fingernails to keep those EVA foam edges lined up. I'm just going to mold those 2 pieces to fit together around the curve of the elbow pad. It doesn't have to be perfect, but once you get it in there, you'll have a nice, structured, curved elbow pad. Then you're going to do the other side just the same, and there's your pad. I like to trim the insides of these out, and you can top stitch them as well if you want to. Then you're going to take your entire elbow pad, bind it all the way around with your same binding material. And there I've top stitched and trimmed the inside of it. I like to use heavy duty snaps to attach the elbow pad to the gauntlet because they're, for one, removable, and 2, it kind of gives them, where they can rotate, it gives them some movement. So you can see how I've lined it up. And now you can see my finished gauntlet with my elbow pad. There's the back of the arm, and there's the front. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and check out SMP Designs for more, and check out the Etsy shop for the patterns for this fitted gauntlet with the elbow pad. See you next time.